welcome everybody to the latest Cumbria Wildlife Trust podcast. And this week, we're going to be featuring one of our flagship reserves, an absolutely wonderful place down in the southwest corner of the county, sunniest part of Cumbria, and it's South Walney. This is the 10th year that we've had seals pupping on South Walney, which is a fantastic success. So we're going to have an interview about the seals and the kinds of things that they get up to. And then later on, we're going to have a bit of a concentration on the birds of South Walney and what you can see at the moment. Other news that has happened since the last podcast is the fantastic news that the Skinner appeal has reached its target of 1.25 million in a matter of just under 6 weeks, which is just so fantastic. And it is quite incredible, the reaction we've had to this appeal, and nearly 7,000 people have given towards that. So if you are one of those people who's contributed to that appeal, massive thank you from us here at Cumbria Wildlife Trust. We had 2 years to raise that money and we did it in just under 6 weeks, so which is fantastic. Anyway, back to South Walney. So joining me today on the podcast is Paul Waterhouse, who is the Reserves Officer in charge of South Walney and Foulney down in that corner of Cumbria. How are you, Paul?
I'm good, thanks, Joe.
Excellent. And you look after a couple of our flagship reserves, don't you? Give us an idea of why South Walney is such a great reserve.
Oh, there's too much to mention, really. But South Walney is one of our oldest nature reserves. So we started leasing South Walney in 1963, just a year after Cumbria Wildlife Trust was officially formed. And we've been leasing it from the Holker Estate all that time, managing it for all kinds of different wildlife. And one of the main things I've noticed is just the wide range of visitors we get. We get people who are interested in birds. We get people who are, interested in the flora of the sites. So, people who are into natural history. But we get holiday makers who just maybe come to see the scenery. It's sort of known locally as a really beautiful walk with beautiful landscapes and the lighthouse. And then obviously we get young families as well. There's all kinds of amazing things for children to sort of engage with on the reserve. It's got quite a lot of visitor infrastructure. So we've got a small visitor centre there that's manned most of the week by volunteers. And we've got numerous bird hides and viewing stations. And yeah, there's a lot to do at South Walney.
Excellent. I mean, it is one of my favourite reserves. It's a strange place, isn't it? Because it's incredibly wild and windswept, but still so close to one of our largest population centres of Barrow.
Yeah, it's about 8 miles from Barrow. Once you've gone through Barrow in Furness, you cross the bridge onto Walney, and you kind of take a left and you go down these little lanes, and it's kind of at the end of nowhere. But you're absolutely right. It's a contrast from the sort of industrial town of Barrow in Furness, and there's this real sort of wilderness, all different types of habitats, sand dunes and salt marshes and the coastal shingle. And yeah, it's a bit of a hidden gem.
It certainly is. One of the things that's special about there is this seal colony that's started in the 90s, did it? And it seems to have grown and grown.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we work very closely with Cumbria Wildlife Trust Marine team who do most of the monitoring, and, they're the real seal experts. However, myself and Bekka at South Walney, we assist where we can, and obviously we're a constant presence on site.
Well, without more of ado, let's go and listen to Beth Churn. So Liz, our roving producer, has been down to South Walney to do a couple of interviews. And first of all, she interviewed Beth. Now, Beth is one of our marine conservation officers. And like Paul said, the marine team are the ones who do the monitoring and keep an eye on what's going on with the seal colony. So we'll go straight over to South Walney and to Liz, who's about to meet Beth.
Yeah, well, it's a pouring wet day here at South Walney, and I've come to one of the hides overlooking the Irish Sea, where Beth's going to tell me all about our Cumbrian Atlantic grey seals. Here we are. Hi, Beth.
Hi, Liz. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's a fantastic view from here, over the shingle and the beach and out to sea, which is fairly covered with mist today, I'm afraid, because of this amazing rain. But Beth, can you tell me all about the colony and how you think it got here?
Yeah, so it's a relatively new colony. It's the only breeding colony of grey seals in the northwest of England, so very special that we've got them at this reserve. So they started appearing in just a handful in the 80s and 90s, but then started growing. So year on year, we'd see more and more seals arriving. And now we've got around 500, so we monitor them and count the sort of population size. And the highest was just over 500 in 2021.
Wow, that sounds a big colony.
It's relative compared to some colonies. It's quite small, but seeing as it's a new one, it's really great that we've got that number here, and it is a lot of seals. Yeah.
So this year we're celebrating 10 years of seal pups, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, which is a really exciting year for us. So they started breeding at this site in 2015. We saw our first seal pups born here. There were 2 born in 2015. And year on year, they've come back to breed. And we've seen seal pups here every single year. So our highest is 10 a few years ago. And again, last year, there were 10 pups. So we're hoping there'll be similar numbers or even more this year.
And how many have we got so far this year?
So far, we have seen 4. So that was over the last couple of weeks. We've had 4 born.
And why did they choose South Walney?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we think they might have first appeared here because other colonies, either from Wales or the Isle of Man or Scotland, had kind of reached their capacity. So those populations might have grown so big and the beaches they were on couldn't support them anymore. So a few of them sort of swam off to find a new place to start hauling out over winter and start breeding. There's a big mussel bed nearby, so they might be going and feeding on that, so it's kind of where they haul out here is quite close to that. Another sort of theory why they might be here is all of the offshore wind farms that have been put into the Irish Sea, sort of just off this coast. And what these do is they create a hard structure in a soft sort of sedimenty area, and lots of creatures will attach and grow onto the turbine bases.
Okay.
And this kind of creates an artificial reef that then attracts fish. And then seals that will eat fish and crabs and stuff will come and feed around the base of the turbines. We don't know if this is why they are here, but it's a good theory of why they might have started appearing.
But there's other reasons, aren't there, about why they come here?
Yeah, I think one of the big reasons is this beach is a safe place for them, because we do try and keep disturbance to a minimum on this bit of beach. So it's closed to the public, so people can't go down onto the beach and can't walk their dogs. And the reason we stop people doing this is to protect the wildlife. So the seals can feel quite threatened by the presence of people, especially the ones here aren't used to people. And if they get scared or feel threatened, they'll go from resting into sort of an alert position. They'll be looking around, feeling stressed. And if they feel really threatened, then they will rush into the sea. And imagine 500 seals all rushing into the sea at the same time in a panic. It can cause a lot of injury. And if there are pups around, they can get trampled. So it's quite serious. If a mum and a pup get disturbed, then the mum might abandon the pup, either long term or just for a bit. But even if it's just for a bit, they might miss a feeding. But also the mum's losing a lot of energy and a lot of body weight, and if she's panicked and stressed, then that could be really dangerous for her. So either the pup or the mum can end up starving.
Some people come down to South Walney and they go on a tour boat, don't they, to see the seals. And one of these operators has actually really taken that message about disturbance to heart.
Yeah, we're really grateful to see that they understand the risk to the mothers and the pups at this time of year when they're at their most vulnerable. So they've chosen to stop doing their seal tours during the pupping season, which is really great.
So Beth, there's a lot of activity out there just now, isn't there? Can you tell me what's going on?
Yeah, so the seals are quite active today. There are quite a few in the water in pairs, playing, sort of play fighting. You can see there are a lot of males around. They're probably, it's coming into breeding season, so they're probably fighting for females' attention. You can tell these ones are the males because of their bigger noses.
Yes, they've got a vast long nose, haven't they?
They do, yeah. Their Latin name actually translates to hooked-nosed pig. But yeah, you can see quite a lot at the moment. Some in the water, some out of the water, some resting, some quite active playing.
Some just coming ashore there in their very clumsy way.
Yeah, they're quite funny to watch when they're on land. Very elegant in the water and then sort of just flop about on the beach.
Oh, there's a lot of playing going on there. There's one just come out of the water and he's gone straight to another one. Is that a pair there then? Is that a male and a female?
Yeah, it looks like, yeah, definitely a male and a female.
Yes, it does. And he's a lot bigger, isn't he?
Yeah, so they can reach about 3 metres long and weigh more than 350 kilograms.
Oh my goodness. But there are some pups here as well, aren't there?
There are, yeah, we can see a pup at the moment. This pup looks like it's probably one of the first pups that was born, so a couple of weeks ago, because it looks quite big right now. And around its face, it's starting to molt. So it's still quite big and white. And it's still got most of its sort of white, fluffy fur. But you can see just on its sort of fins and around its nose, it's turning quite grey. Just it's snoozing right now.
Really is chunky, isn't it?
Yeah, so this will be probably about 4 times the weight it was when it was born.
And it'll stay there now for another couple of weeks?
Yeah, at least another few weeks. Its mum will leave it soon so that she can go and feed herself, because she would have been fasting while she's been feeding her pup. So it'll get left to fend for itself. And once it's fully molted, it'll venture into the sea.
So where is its mum, and will she come back?
Yeah, so its mum, I think, is quite nearby, actually. She's just asleep.
There she is.
Meters away. But they can go into the water. They'll always be nearby and be watching. But sometimes the pups can appear to be by themselves. Usually the mum is around and will return.
She just lifted her head then and had a bit of a stretch. So, yeah. And she's leaving him or her quite a distance away, having a bit of peace, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Are we aware of whether it's the same seals coming back year after year to have their pups here?
We definitely know that some are. Yeah, it's quite hard to identify all of the hundreds of seals that are here. We assume it is the same ones coming back. But the mums, we know that there have been some mums returning each year. And we know this because each seal has a unique pattern on their fur. The females, their fur is quite light, but has these sort of like speckled grey or sort of darker brown blobs on them. Each sort of pattern is individual. So we've taken photos of all of the mums and pups, and we can identify them based on their fur patterns. And we know that they're returning.
I mean, that sounds quite challenging, actually, Beth.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult. I do enjoy doing it, though. It's quite fun to look for patterns on them. And it can be difficult when the photos are slightly different angles and the neck's stretched and it can be hard.
You'd really need exactly the same silhouette, wouldn't you?
Yeah, you would, yeah.
And so they haul out in the autumn. Yeah. So can you describe what happens throughout the rest of the year?
Yeah, so like I said, over sort of summer and springtime, the seals are out at sea mostly, feeding. But then this time of year, they'll come back to a haul-out location to rest, but also to breed. So the females will give birth, usually in October, November. So the females will then breed pretty much straight after they've given birth. But their egg doesn't implant for about 3 months while they rest and they molt. And then their egg implants and they're pregnant for the rest of the year.
Gosh, there's no let-up for mum then, is there?
No, it's not. It's pretty constant.
When the mums leave the pups on the beach, they're going off to feed, are they?
Yes. So for the first 3 weeks, the mum will stay with the pup to feed it. They might go into the water a little bit, but they'll always be watching and they'll always be nearby. But after that 3 weeks, they will leave them because they've lost so much weight during the feeding process. The mum will go out and need to feed again. So she'll go off a bit further offshore and then still come back to breed and molt and everything, but she'll properly sort of leave the pup to its own devices at that point. So the pup will stay on the beach for about another month until it's fully molted its white fur away, until it gets hungry enough that it needs to go fend for itself and start catching fish.
The seals feed in the sea and in Morecambe Bay, presumably?
Yeah, so a lot of them stay around. Some of them can travel quite huge distances, actually. And some tagging studies have revealed movement, like hundreds and hundreds of kilometres. I think some from the UK have turned up in other places in Europe.
Oh, wow.
But there's definitely movement between the colonies on the Isle of Man and North Wales and here.
Whilst they are around here, are they going to be competing for fish with local anglers? Has that become an issue?
In terms of the amount of fish that seals will eat, I think it's actually quite small compared to the amount that is taken through commercial fishing. So a study was done in the North Sea, and I think commercial fishing accounted for 36% of fish stocks, whereas all marine mammals only took about 0.8, and that's including dolphins and whales and everything like that. So if you got rid of the seals, there wouldn't actually be that many fish freed up for fishermen. I think what people do find frustrating with seals is they can damage fishing gear and they can sort of take fish out of their nets and take big bites out of them, and I think that could be quite frustrating for smaller scale fishermen.
Yeah. So Betty, people come down to look for the seals. When's the best time of year to see them, and when's the best time of day? So
they're around all year round, but the numbers peak when they come to haul out and to breed. From our surveys, we found the highest numbers are usually in January and February. Best time of day, if you want to be able to see them from Groin Hyde on the reserve, you can see them at low tide, hauled out on the beach. You will need to bring binoculars or a long lens camera because it is quite far away. If you come at high tide, you might be able to see them closer to the hide because the tide will be in, and they're often seen playing in the water. So yeah, just look at the tides when you come down.
But there are other ways that people can see them, aren't there?
Yeah, so you can see them from the comfort of your own home, from the seal cam, which is a live stream from the spit, and that's 24 hours a day. You'll be able to see that from the Cumbria Wildlife Trust website. You can also see that at the visitor centre. We've got a big screen up, and you can ask a volunteer to move the camera around and sort of zoom in, so you can get a good look at the seals. And often the seal pups are sort of on the screen, so you can watch them live.
Well, Beth, thanks for coming over on such a wet and wild day. Good weather for seals, perhaps?
Yeah, they like it wet, yeah.
They do like it wet. OK, not quite so good for us.
Well, what a fantastic report from Beth. And she's so knowledgeable about the natural history of those animals.
Yeah, the marine team are, very committed to the conservation of the grey seal colony at South Walney. They do a brilliant job at protecting the seals and raising awareness around disturbance. And yeah, they really are experts in their field.
And like you said earlier, we've been managing the reserve for a long, long time. And I'm really convinced that South Walney is such a special place because of the policing role the Trust has had there since the 1960s. And because a lot of the habitats and a lot of those areas are undisturbed.
Absolutely. So we control access to the beaches and to the spit. So there's no dogs allowed on the reserve whatsoever. And there's no people allowed on the beaches. And the researchers proved that minimising disturbance has a significant effect on the productivity of shore nesting birds.
Yeah, I think you're right. That lack of disturbance, I think, is why the reserve is so good. And as well as the seals, like you mentioned, it's absolutely brilliant for its bird life, whether it's the breeding birds. Like when I first went there, it was absolutely covered from one end to the other in seagulls, and it was a frightening place, really. You just used to get attacked all the time. But so it's got its breeding birds, but it's brilliant for its migratory birds and its wintering birds, isn't it?
Yeah, and obviously we have the Walney Bird Observatory as well, which isn't officially Cumbria Wildlife Trust, but we work closely with Colin of the Bird Observatory. And he monitors migration on the nature reserve. And yeah, it's quite amazing what birds turn up.
I totally agree. One of my favourite experiences of South Walney was going late September on a beautiful day and talking to Colin, who was stood out by Seahide, doing his visible migration and clocking the birds that came over. And I could not believe the numbers of small songbirds that were passing through. It was just incredible. And I think most people kind of miss that, and that incredibly important part of South Walney.
Yeah, Colin is well-known ornithologist and very committed to monitoring at South Walney. And
Right, well, that sets us up nicely for our second interview of today. And Liz has been down again to South Walney to talk to Bekka. And Bekka is our bird warden on the ground, and she's been monitoring the breeding birds over the summer. So without more ado, we'll cut to our roving reporter, Liz, and Bekka Watts.
Thanks, Joe. I've just come back to South Walney, this time, as you say, to see the birds and not the seals. And today's a beautiful day. I'm just going to join Bekka in the Peggy Braithwaite hide, which overlooks Lighthouse Bay near the eastern tip of Walney Island. Hello, Bekka. Tell me why you suggested we come to this particular hide.
So I brought you here today to have a look at some of the amazing birds that we have on the reserve. This area is really good for seeing some of our waders and our gulls and ducks, and it is just a lovely place to be.
If somebody was to come down to South Walney about this time of year, sort of late October, early November, what would they be most likely to see?
So if they came at this time, we have a lot of different waders, wildfowl and passerines. So if we're looking at waders, you'll see a lot of greenshank, redshank, black-tailed godwits, grey plovers, turnstones and knot, for example. There's also wildfowl, so you'll see a lot of brent geese, pintail, widgeon and shoveler. We also have a lot of passerines that come in, so the goldcrests have just started to arrive en masse, which is nice. Also raptors, we have sparrowhawks, kestrels, short-eared owls and barn owls and merlins. So there's a whole heap of different things that you can see anytime, and you'll get to see some amazing birds here.
Tell me what we can see just now and how people would recognise these particular bird species.
Okay, so looking through my scope at the minute, the main thing that you'll see instantly are the great black-backed gulls. Now, they're so much bigger than everything else. They are black on the top, they're black-winged, white underneath, and they've got pink legs, a bright yellow beak with the little red bit underneath, the same as the herring gull you'll see in the town centre. And they're just so much bigger than everything else. Walking amongst them, we've got turnstones. You can really see compared to them how little they are. We've got quite a big group. They're a nice little wader. They are white on the bottom and they've got this lovely black bib. And on the top, they're almost like a chestnutty brown. Really pretty little wader. So at the moment, they're doing what they're known for, which is turning over things to look for their food. And we've got some sandalling as well. So we've got a nice little group.
We've been looking at the turnstones who are doing what they do in the tin, which is turning over the stones.
That's right.
But the sandalling aren't, are they? What are they doing?
No, so sandalling actually don't feed in this kind of environment. They feed out on sandbars. But there's a small group of them out there now, and what they'll be doing is roosting, conserving energy, waiting for the tide to go out, and then they'll head out to the sand and they'll start feeding. And what they do is they do this comical little run where they're avoiding the waves and they run in and out and they're grabbing little bits of crustacean and what they feed on.
Roosting is really, really important as part of the pattern of their day.
It is really important. They need to roost and conserve their energy because they spend a lot of time out feeding, and especially just after the breeding season, everything's a bit depleted for them. So they really need that time to recoup and gain their strength to be able to find their food. And the ones that are continuing to migrate further, like the black-tailed godwits, will need this time as almost like a stop-off point on their migration. So it's really crucially important that they're able to roost.
Why is South Walney such a magnet for them?
South Walney is an amazing combination of different habitats, and that's really what brings all the different types of birds that we have together. So we have the sand dunes, that attracts things like the sanderling. We have the shingle, which is brilliant for those that breed here. So we have the ring plover and the oyster catcher that breed here, and they'll stay all year round and they can feed within that. Shingle is really good because a lot of insects are within the shingle, so that's a great food source. And we also have the salt marsh, which is really important because it brings a lot of different species in. Certain grasses feed the ducks and the brent geese that we have. It also attracts small fish, mollusks, and other things that species like our gulls will feed on. So it's a really important space for all these different types of birds.
Yeah, so what have you picked up on the telescope now?
So what I'm looking at now is a nice group of oyster catcher, and amongst them there's a couple of redshank and some black-headed gulls.
Yeah.
The area of land that they're on is in the middle of the water, and it's a good roost spot for them because they feel like they're safe from predators, so we get very large groups. And then when the tide's out, they'll begin feeding.
In this bay here?
In this bay, because this is all mud flat here, so they'll all start feeding in this space.
You talked about the fact that some of the birds are breeding here. I think you said the oyster catchers.
Oyster catchers, ring plover and little tern are the target species that we have that breed here, but there's also focus on lapwing and the gulls that we have here as well. These are all the things that I monitor during the spring and summer for breeding.
And some of these birds stay all year round, but others are just passing through.
Yeah, so the little terns and the Arctic terns are passing through. The little terns have gone now, and the Arctic terns have gone as well. They've headed to Africa and Antarctica, which is a big, long journey for such a small bird. And the ring plover, the oyster catcher, and the lapwing are all still here. They stay all year.
And then some come in specially for the winter, don't they?
They do, yes. So black-tailed godwits and greenshank come in specially for the winter. Dunlin and turnstone are a bit confusing because we have some that stay here all year round and others join them in the winter.
What's the best time of year to come to South Walney then? Or is there no best time? Is it just always brilliant for bird watchers?
So visiting South Walney all year is brilliant. So if you come in the spring and summer, you can see the Arctic terns, the little terns, the swallows, everything that migrates here. And you can see the chicks, the young, which is a really exciting time. If you come over the autumn and winter, you'll get the migrants come in, which is really, really nice to see. So things like the knot, the greenshank, the widgeon, brent geese. So really all year round, it's an exciting time.
And what's your favourite time?
Ooh, my favourite time's the breeding season, definitely. Seabirds are my passion. I absolutely love them. And my main passion are terns. So Arctic terns and little terns when they arrive, and when the sandwich terns are heading through, they're on their way to Hodbarrow mostly. That's my favourite time. It's really exciting to watch out for them, and I love getting to see them settle and their behaviours, their courtship. It's really exciting for me.
They're very graceful birds, aren't they?
They are. They're really, really graceful and beautiful to watch on the wing. Yeah.
They're like swallows, only sea swallows, aren't
Swallows
they?
of the sea. Yeah.
And just tell me about that amazing migration that they do.
Yeah. Arctic terns We get them on passage here. They will feed here and we'll see them pretty much every day throughout the breeding season. They nest on Walney Island, which is another island that Cumbria Wildlife Trust manages. And they do 22,000 miles for their migration. So it's a lot.
That's a staggering journey, isn't it? Yeah.
Arctic to the Antarctic. So it's pretty impressive. Yeah. Yes. So they come back every year and they also mate for life. And they live for quite a long time as well. They can live... I think the oldest one recorded is 34, so they can live for a long time and they're bonded for life. By the time they can breed, they can start breeding at about 3-year-old.
And they'll always come back to the same spot?
They'll always come back to the same spot, yeah, unless they are disturbed by predation.
So, Bekka, things are arriving and leaving every few minutes, aren't they? So what are we looking at now?
So we've just had a little influx of turnstones. We've had a small group arrive. There's probably about, I'd say, 20 of them that have just popped up on the shingle just in front of the hide. They are taking advantage of the tide slowly going out. There's also a couple of dunlin running around amongst them there. And all of them are taking advantage of the fact that the water is receding and they've just started to flip over bits of seaweed to look for little bits of like insects and crustaceans that they feed on. They're really impressive because they can lift a surprising weight. They can lift stones almost as big as them, which is quite amazing to watch.
So, Bekka, what is it about South Walney that you like best? It's a pretty wild, it's a pretty isolated, pretty windswept sort of place, but that doesn't bother you?
No, it doesn't bother me. It attracted me, actually. I love that kind of place, and it is just so wild and exposed and so natural, and I love that about it.
Tell me about your role and how you protect the birds.
So what I do here is I monitor the birds and I check on their nests. So I go out and I do surveys, regular surveys, check on my nests and eggs, see what's hatched, note down how many have hatched and monitor them right the way through until the fledging period. I look after ring plover nests and I cage them. Luckily, they are a small enough wading bird that we can cage them, which means that they have a much higher success rate of hatching.
Why is that?
Because the nest is covered, it stops predation from things like rats and foxes, and also aerial predators like sparrowhawks. They tend to take the chicks, the eggs, and the adults. So an adult that is sitting is really exposed. So when it is in a nest cage, they're not going to be taken by a predator. So they're really important, the nest cages.
So the cage would surround them, but obviously not the top, so they can still come and go.
No, the top is covered as well. Ring plovers tend to walk to their nest. They land a distance away and they walk in. So there is a gap big enough where they can walk in and out. But the top is covered, so it stops aerial predators from getting in, and it also stops things like foxes from getting their paws or noses in. So it's really useful.
How has this season been then in terms of the success of the birds who've been here?
Unfortunately, this last breeding season was not a particularly good one, except for our gull colony. The other species that we have, the little terns, the oyster catchers, lapwing, ring plover, they all suffered a lot because the weather was poor and because of predation. So a combination of both of those things, as well as a decline in the vole population, which caused the aerial predators to utilise chicks instead of voles. It's all been a bit of a recipe for disaster this year.
Oh dear. So what can we do about that?
We can look at fencing certain sections of the reserve, like where our little terns nest. To put a permanent fence there would be very beneficial, because the other problem is livestock can get into temporary fences, and once that fence is broken, either livestock trample the eggs or it allows predators in. So putting up a permanent fence, it's a really successful method. And also just to educate the public, let them know why they're not allowed on the beaches, why they're not allowed to bring their dogs onto this specific reserve, and to sort of get them on side so that they understand what we're trying to do here and how we're not just trying to police rules that are pointless, to explain to them that this is why it's necessary. And once they understand, they're really, really interested, actually, and willing to abide by those rules, which is great.
Well, fingers crossed that the number of breeding birds will recover again next season. Thanks very much, Bekka, for your time and for being such a great bird-watching guide.
Thank you for your time.
Well, that was brilliant from Bekka, wasn't it? And she paints a beautiful picture of watching those waders feeding outside of the hide there.
Yeah, no, we're really fortunate to have Bekka on the ground and doing all the monitoring of the shore nesting birds, which is really, really important. Bekka's role has actually been funded by a project called Life on the Edge with partners from ourselves, the RSPB, and National Trust, etc.
And as well as the wading birds and the terns, she's been looking after the big gulls as well, hasn't she? The big gull colony that I mentioned earlier that was so traumatic to so many young people of Barrow in the old days. And then we lost so many of the gulls, didn't we? Probably to changes in the environment around and capping the tips off and changes in fishing practices as well. But the gulls are doing well again, aren't they?
Relatively, yeah, they are doing well. I mean, I don't think we'll ever see the tens of thousands that you sort of mentioned before. I think those days are probably gone. A few years ago, we were very concerned, and we were down to just a few hundred pairs. I think around 2018, 2019. However, since then, we've again through this Life on the Edge project, we put up an anti-predator fence around the spit, which is where the main colony was still remaining. And since then, the population has gone up considerably and productivity of chicks has gone up considerably. And yeah, we have this huge fence. The visitors will have seen it, particularly from Groinhide, sort of behind where the seals are. This large fence that protects the gull colony, particularly from ground predators like foxes in particular and badgers. And it keeps the predators out and it allows the productivity and the sort of a safer nesting environment for the gulls. And it has worked incredibly well. And we're up to from several hundred pairs up to around 2,000 now, which is just in a few years.
Yeah, you mentioned the productivity. This is one thing I think that people don't realize, because you can have as many nests as you want, but if the chicks don't actually make it to adulthood, then they're not recruiting back into the population, and therefore that population is going down quite massively. And we had a real problem in the past, didn't we, with the gulls and not being able to recruit back. So hopefully this is seeing the population increase.
Absolutely. It's quite amazing what sort of lengths we go to protect these scarce, or rare breeding birds. But yeah, they particularly ground nesting birds really do have the odds stacked against them. And I know Bekka seemed a little bit disappointed with this breeding year, but breeding success or productivity differs every year for a number of different factors. Many of those factors are out of our control. So the weather, for one, this year's been very wet, which is obviously not going to have a good effect on small chicks. And, things like availability of prey. We had a huge crash last year in rabbit numbers due to myxomatosis, and that was a main prey source for a lot of the foxes, etc. So yeah, there's all kinds of factors that affect the productivity, and we do what we can as conservationists to increase that productivity, but a lot of it is out of our hands.
So Paul, out of all our reserves, what's your favourite thing this time of the year?
Oh, crikey. Well, it could be a bit of a cliche, but I really love the colours of autumn. The changing of the leaves on the trees. So, quite different to my nature reserves that I manage myself, like South Walney and the Witherslack Mosses. I'd say, some of our woodland sites like Brown Robin and Barkbooth Lot, where you can see the change into autumn, if you like.
Yeah, it seems particularly good this year as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, really does.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And Brown Robin that you used to manage, not only does that have all the beautiful autumn colours, but it's got that great wax cap fungi, hasn't it? That grassland fungi of the different types. They're beautiful colours as well. And they're all up this time of year, especially on that side on Merwood Bank.
Absolutely. I was out walking at the weekend and we were seeing them on, lots of different types of wax caps on Humphrey Head as well. Another beautiful place to go.
Well, if you like listening to the podcast, please let us know what you think. And it would be great if you could let other people know about it and even give us a like on Spotify. Anyway, a big thanks have to go to Beth and to Bekka for their interviews, to Liz, our producer, and thank you, Paul, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Okay, cheers, Jay.
So next time we're going to be hearing a bit more about two resident mammals. We're going to be covering beavers, which are very new to the county, and red squirrels. So I hope you can join us then.